Daphne Moore, contributor with Cascade Media Group. Hello, y'all. Today I am with the lovely Tasha Pettis Bonds. How you doing, Tasha?
Doing wonderful.
So
Doing wonderful.
tell the audience a little bit about you. I know you don't like this question, but we're going to ask
Mm,
it anyway. Just a little
it's
bit of
my
introduction.
least favorite question of all times. So I'm Tasha Pettis Bonds, born and raised in the city of St. Louis, Missouri. A graduate of Rosati Kane High School, attended the University of Missouri, mother of a blended family of seven. I have had a very illustrious career of 27 years in the banking and non-for-profit space, primarily in leadership roles. And let me think what else would I like to say about myself. Two absolutely incredible parents to set examples for all five of their children, and definitely a daddy's girl. And I love to travel and spend time with my wonderful kids.
Cool. Well, thank you for allowing us to get to know you a little bit better. So when I ask these questions, they'll be like, "Oh, I see how that relates to that." So you've had this remarkable journey from banking, and recently you've become an author. Not a one book, but two books, y'all. And
Yes.
so, can you kind of talk about what inspired you to leap into authorship? And just like, girl, you got skills. She wrote these books, y'all, like in like no time, and was like texting like, I got a book signed. I'm like, I didn't even know you wrote a book, but kind of talk to the audience about that leap.
You know what? I've always loved to write since I was a little girl. I remember the first poem I ever memorized when I was in kindergarten, recited it at graduation. And I always say that's what really sparked this interest in reading, writing, and just the art of poetry and literature and just all sorts of, when you think about English literature as a whole, emphasized it continuously throughout grade school, high school, even in college. I minored in English literature. And even in the roles I've had in banking, I've always been that person that raised their hand and volunteer if there's a bio that needs to be written, or if there's something, bullet points that we need to present to our team and our marketing staff. So I've always just loved to play around with words. The two books that I've actually got published came at completely different points in my life. They just came out at the same time. The one book, the From Whence I Came, as only I could tell, spearheaded from some conversation that my sister and I had about the very first book that I wrote. That is not even a name. It's not even been published just yet.
Oh, wow.
She read this book and she said she absolutely loved it, but she was daring me. She's always my challenger. She challenged me to do more focus on the four characters in the book, the four main women. She said, because I want to see separate books on each one of the women. And so I said, that means that if it didn't capture all four women to their capacity in this, one book, there's a potential for sequels. But what I heard her say was, let's perfect the individual characters so that people can understand if they're in the day of a life of Daphne, it can be captured. If they're in a week of the life of Tasha, it can be captured and they can follow and feel it. So that's where the concept came up for writing the 26 short stories with ladies' names.
26, y'all. 20, not one, 26, and on 26 different women, right?
Yes, 26 different women. And someone asked me recently, did you ever experience all of that? And I was like, no, one of them is an old white woman. I'm not a white woman. And it's just all of these different things that I could, try to morph myself into these different spaces. And so that's where this book came from, was this dare from my sister to develop a character, or where you may be able to read one short story and be like, I felt that. Like in that very short story, I could feel that coming of age story of that young lady. Or I can feel this woman who's, about to commit suicide or who has committed suicide. You can feel in that one very short story. So I attributed that to being able to be successful, but I shelved it. I shelved that book for so many years. And Daphne, if it hadn't been for a medical incident last year that put me on leave, I wouldn't have paid attention to getting the book published because I always let my career take over. So when I wrote that book, it was when I was on medical leave, probably 8 years ago, when I'd had a mild heart attack and I was bored to death at home. I said, go ahead and concentrate on your writing. I took that then when I was on medical leave this time, and it was the only thing I did not accomplish during my 50-year time, hitting all 50 things when I turned 50. I said, this is your time to do it. In between that time, I wrote the Book of Five. And the Book of Five is simply poems and little short snippets I used to write to this guy I was in love with. And I took
Love.
all of those and compiled it.
I was going to ask you, how do you get, where did it come from? But love stories. I mean, I feel like you're a romantic person. Like, if you know Tasha, she loves love. Like, you can just tell, like, that's just who she is. And I was like, this is exactly something that you would do. But poetry, okay, first you had the 26 characters and then you went to poetry. Like, I told y'all, she got skills. So tell us more about your poetry and the old. It's the Book of
Five
and
An
Ode
Ode to Love.
to Love. Okay.
Yep. So that came, I was seeing a guy during COVID, and we were separated initially. How people are separated, everybody was afraid for their lives. So when during our courtship, I would write him these little poems once in a while, and you see this story come to life of this. When I'm in moments of doubt about the relationship, when I'm feeling extremely strong, when I was feeling vulnerable, you saw the ups of the relationship, but then you start seeing the downs. The downs came at a time when I had actually broken up with him. And I continued to write almost as if I was sending them to him, but he was not aware at all that I was continuing to write these poems because I was keeping them to myself. And I remember the day I wrote the last poem in the book. It was kind of like this full circle of the relationship where you envision coming back to that love that had meant so much to you. And it's funny because right around the time I was seeking to go ahead and get the book published, we rekindled our flame after not being together for, a few years. And so it's kind of like full circle that here we are, at the space where the book is being published and him knowing that it was all about him.
Wow. I bet you he feel like, I'm just saying, men have that ego and I ain't mad at them. So kudos to him. So let's talk about this career. First of all, there are not a lot of women in banking in the St. Louis region. And when you think about across the country, banking is not the first thing that most people think about when they think about women. Can you kind of talk about your career? You've had some big positions where you're over major territories. You've done community banking, you've done community and economic development. Can you kind of talk about, like, one, what is it like to be in banking, and then kind of talk about some of your banking experience and some of your projects?
Yeah, so I'll kind of go back to what made me even get into banking. So my degree was in political science with a focus on urban planning. So 30 plus years ago, I had no idea banking was going to be at the forefront of my mind. I used to want to be an attorney. And I knew one of the reasons why I wanted to be an attorney was because I always wanted to fight for people and fight for justice and, the right way to do things, and focusing on social justice issues, even when I was younger, and looking for this fair space for everybody, but I never equated that to a future, especially the career that I was able to have in banking. Banking came about by, happenstance, actually. I had graduated from college, and by the time I graduated, I had one child, and I had a second child on the way. When I was having the second child, I could no longer work I was in a rent-a-center. I can no longer commit to 50 hours a week, being paid what I was being paid, the long hours every Saturday, because I wanted to be a family mom, And so I had to think about some of the things that I learned over those 2 years of being in leadership at Rent-A-Center that I absolutely loved. So I love sales. I loved focusing on a customer experience, and I loved operational soundness, like risk management and, auditing and making sure everything was in alignment. And I also loved challenging the systems that were in place, and challenging our leadership at Rena Center on this should be what we should be doing for our community instead of some of the predatory lending that we were doing.
Right.
And so I took a step back and said, okay, if this is what you like to do, what career is going to afford you to be able to do it pretty much from a 9 to 5? And that was only when I first got into banking that it was 9 to 5, because, I would be meeting sometimes at 10 p.m. at night in the end,
Right.
just to close the deal or just to, connect this person to this person. And so I jumped into banking because of that reason. The bank that I happened to be placed at was in Creve Coeur, Missouri, which is a predominantly white community. I was the only Black banker at my location. My manager was a Black woman, but I was the only Black banker. So that person that you walked out, other than that, it was a couple of Black tellers. My very first role at this particular bank, when I walked in, they sat me at the very first seat, which I thought, this is great. They're going to take advantage of everything that I've learned immediately. But at the time, you had a receptionist. It was a white lady, and she would give me all of the service. So people
Mm.
coming in to complain, people wanting fees reversed, people wanting to order checks. But I noticed all of the things that we got bonused off of, she was sending it to the 3 white ladies that
Oh,
worked there. And at first I was like, I don't like that, because this is not how it's supposed to be. But I hadn't earned my stripes yet, per se, right? To be able to be empowered to
right.
speak out against it. So I said, you know what? I'm going to beat them by turning all of my service into sales opportunities. And so I started really paying attention to, you came in to do an address change. And so all of a sudden, I'm talking to you about your new home that you got. What are you doing with your old home? Have you sold it yet? When you do sell it, what are you doing with the profits? So I found myself in this little groove that you are curious about people because you simply want to position them to do and be better. And that's how I won a lot of my business early on. So I became one of the top performing bankers within my first quarter there. I didn't want the new accounts. I challenged them, keep giving me all the service issues, because my service scores were through the roof, all 5s on the ratings I was
Right.
receiving. But it's because I took that extra step to learn, okay, this is your situation. How can I make it better? And blah, blah, blah. So needless to say, I was only at that bank for about a year, year and a half. And it was because I was executing at a level of management, because now I'm teaching other people in my branch what to do. I'm spending time with the teller saying, hey, if a customer's coming in with a complaint, instead of you guys trying to handle the complaint, send them my way. I'll work through the complaint with them, blah, blah, blah. So I was always like this people
Okay.
person to help navigate through. So after that year, year and a half, my branch manager had resigned. She went to another bank. And it's this bank that I was at was a bigger bank. And I asked them to consider me for the bank management program that I'd seen them put my white counterpart into. And the guy who was running the market at the time said, we know you're number one in the market. He said, but our program won't be open for another year. He said, but I would love for you to act as manager in this particular branch. And I thought about it. And I remember to this day, I told him, I said, well, all stars in Hollywood get paid to act.
That's right.
And I was making, at the time, probably 40,000. I wish I would run a branch just to show you I deserve the position. No, I want to go into the same program that my counterpart is in. Well, needless to say, that particular branch manager, branch manager went on to be a district manager at a different bank. And so she called me about an assistant manager role. After I got the assistant manager role, she called me like 2 weeks later and said, there's a hold on your position because the branch manager's quit. And so we've got to find a new branch manager. I said, who do I need to talk to? I'm ready. Now, keep in mind, I'd only been in banking for a year and a half. So I had the sales acumen, I had the service acumen, I had the audit acumen. The only thing I needed to do was have a chance to be elevated into a leadership role. And she gave me just that. I remember meeting with the bank's owner. He flew me down into Texas to talk a little bit about the new role. I was at this bank the only Black branch manager out of about 27 branches at the time. And I came and equipped with me the big bank's knowledge, but at this time I had to learn what the community feel was like because this was a smaller bank. And so from that opportunity, my career just continued to grow and grow and grow to where I was, leading marketplaces, but then ultimately leading 3 states, with the last role that I held. So I've been in banking for almost 30 years.
That's
No,
impressive.
about 27 years, but I've served small business, mortgage, investments, community and economic development, operational soundness. I have been a senior vice president. I have been uh, director. You call it.
Name it,
I've
you've done
probably
it.
done it. And
Well, that's a good thing.
what I most tell people when I think about my career in one big nutshell is that I've always been intentional in developing future leaders, especially future leaders that look like me and that deserve the same opportunity that I was given, but they had an opportunity to have somebody in the role that they could emulate and see. So
Right.
then I can mentor them and help grow their capacity to be future leaders. But also, I had this uncanny approach to how do banks need to think about connecting to the communities that we are serving at a different space and place of what we had been. So it's
Okay.
been a full circle career and one that's been, near and dear to me.
Good. So I was going to ask you one question, but I'm going to move to this other question since you've been talking about banking and community and how you help community. I know that you have been involved in a lot of nonprofit organizations, and if you've mentioned your small business acumen and helping small businesses, and you also helped Maryville develop a small business program. Can you kind of talk about one, that program, and then a little bit about your passion for community? I know that you are vocal about women's issues and supporting the underserved community. So kind of talk about how that passion.
That passion really started for me when I was at a big bank. I'll just say the big bank. And because at that time there was a lot of athletes that were coming in and they just didn't know how to balance the checkbook. They didn't know how to write a check, send a wire. They didn't know anything. And so my goal at that time was to help these newly wealthy individuals save for finance, build some strong
Right.
financial futures. And so at the banking level in the branch, it was very simple. You have the most basic conversation, and then you gain their trust, and then you pass them off to your private client group. That grew exponentially because at that point, my cousin played for the team. And so everybody that needed a simple answer, you got to go see my cousin. You got to go see my cousin. And so I became like the banker of a lot of the athletes that were in the market at that time. I didn't even see that as me having this passion for giving back to the community. I didn't equate it to that. That was wealth. They had money. When I got into my next role, it was pretty much the same. I managed a bank in Ladue, and this lady came in. She asked for the branch manager. I came out of my office. She did not believe that there was a Black woman in
In
Ladue
Ladue.
managing a branch. Once we got in the office, she started crying about the settlement that she just went through her divorce. And she wanted to prove her husband wrong, that she was not going to lose all of her money. And he had, that was the last comment he made to her was that, I don't care, you're going to blow it anyway. And she wanted to prove him wrong. But she was so touched by this statement and that she wanted to make sure she got it right. So she
Right.
came to our branch and she was in tears because she didn't know how to write a check. She didn't know how to do anything. And so just spending time with her every single week, she introduced me to a divorce group that was held at a location in Ladue. So now I'm meeting her family and friends who are going through divorces as well and teaching these women a little bit about banking. And you got this natural assumption that these people already know how to bank.
Right.
No, they had been given everything and just they weren't allowed to see how the money was managed in the household. I was able to think about if I can do it with this particular group, how do I go back to the community that my parents were born and raised in? Because if these people who have money don't know, then our people didn't know. or the underserved communities didn't know. So I tell people all the time, my story around financial education didn't start with me being at a low income branch. It started when I was at an affluent branch and said, all of these tools and resources that I'm finding out about, how do I take them now into the inner city and make sure from an equitable lens, everybody's being given the full opportunity to be at their best and build wealth. And
That's
that's where
good.
my passion really started back in,
Okay.
it was around 2004 when I really started studying financial education. And, at the time it was called financial literacy. But I
Right.
really started taking a deep dive into what does this mean to want to educate people financially. During that time frame, I started not wanting to just work with individuals. I started kind of learning around 2008 that we needed to spend equal amount of time with small businesses. Because by then I had been a small business lender. And I remember, it was like 10 years before then I was a small business lender. But I remembered the number of declines that our bank as a whole was coming in. But then I also was remembering, well, why are you at 100% close ratio? And I had to reflect on, oh, because you're actually taking the time and educating your people on
Was
what
that
they.
in a was that small businesses? Was it women? Was it minorities? Or was it a combination
It
of
was when I was a small business lender. It was a combination. It was a combination. But I really wanted to. So what I understood was that this particular bank had a high decline rate, and it was across the board as any bank. A lot of people
right?
feel that it's only a high decline in our community. No, it's a high decline rate
Well,
all
that's nice
over.
to know sometimes because we get to
Yes,
decline a lot.
yes, yes, yes. But what I wanted to do was make sure that we built this space where if you know the tools and resources and if you know the checklist to get an approval, how do I get more people to know what those tools and resources look like and the checklist so I can match you with the proper tools and resources to get you approved for that loan?
Is that how you built out the Maryville Small Business Program?
Yes. So the Maryville Small Business Program kind of was it was from trial and error over the years of doing different workshops and taking a look at, not from just my lens as the banker, what are the small business owners saying that they need, but what tools and resources, what partners, what banks are going to lend to them. Okay, why are you not going to lend to them? What are you looking for? So really being able to tackle all of those things and bring it together and focus, because I was at the Urban League's Women's Business and I was the first executive director that they had there. So it was then that I built out the very first
Okay.
full-blown curriculum that I was responsible for, not just me being a banker and going to an
Right.
organization and saying, here are some recommendations, or here are some workshops I could teach you. I was able to build out the full curriculum for them and then partner with some other entities on what their curriculum could look like too. So once I got around to the Maryville University opportunity, I realized that we had so many people talking small business and small business technical support in our marketplace. But I was like, how many of us are really spending time at the core of that business leader? How
That's
much
true.
passion are we putting into developing them and not just focusing on their business? So that's what I built out for Maryville, was really
Okay.
this focus around the individual business owner and some of the gaps that I saw in all of the other programs, or some of the challenges, quite honestly, because some of the programs when you get involved with them, you're here with them from month 1 through month 6, and then you're on your own and good luck. Or some of them you're attending for one workshop and then that's it. Good luck. There's no follow up. So I wanted to make sure with my relationship with Maryville that I built something that was the beginning and something that could be the end. But then from that, they are partnered with other entities and other organizations that can continue to strengthen what they learned about themselves as
Got you.
business owners.
So before we get out of here, I want to ask you two more questions. So one, you have a large blended family. So I really want to for you to kind of talk about, like, what is that like? I mean, you're in leadership and you have this big family and you're trying to juggle all these things. You're writing books, banking, doing your community activism. Like, how do you juggle all of that and how has that helped you parent better and be a better leader?
Whew, it was tough. Early on, I had no idea that my career would jump off at the level that it did and as fast as it did. and the opportunities that were coming to me at 100 miles per hour. So I had to make sure that I had the right partner at home to support me because I was out, I was doing it. But I also had to make sure that I had the right family support too, because if he couldn't, then I knew I needed this cousin in Creve Coeur who lived right around the corner. She was on pickup shift and I was on drop off. So we had this plan in place. So I'd always tell people, if you're ever getting on a certain level, making sure what that true support looks like so that you won't burn yourself out.
Right.
Also making sure you remain true to who you are, but what your family needs. So I was always at my, and I got this from my mother. My mother died young, she was 44. But my mother never missed one of my basketball games. I was a cheerleader. She never missed one of my brother's football games. And I used to tell her, I don't want kids because I don't know how you're doing what you, she was a leader at the company she was with before she died for 27 years. I don't know how you're doing that and managing 5 kids. She told me, when you have kids, you'll know. And I'm like, I'm not having no kids. And here I am. I married someone who had 3. Then we had 1 together. So that was the first thing. But also, like I said, being honoring the time that I committed to my family. So we always vacationed. We always hung out together. But it was always like this time management point 10, on 10 all the time. So it was tough. And them knowing that my brand was where I worked at. So them understanding that if I came to a football game, I might be dressed completely in
Right.
my work gear, but then I might have to pull that off and throw on their team sweatshirt as I'm coming down, rushing in to make sure I miss kickoff. So it's always been fun to be able to manage through that. I don't know how I did it. I do know I had that mild heart attack at a young age, but by then I had so many of them out of the house that I think it was more so due to work stress at the time. Yeah. But, I attribute most of that to the family that I was born and raised in. The commitment that my parents had to us 5 children, it's uncomparable. They were there for everything. They were there. And even to this day, my father is one of our biggest advocates with even our young kids. So I think that's where a lot of this comes from within me.
Good.
And
That's good.
we just celebrated my daughter's wedding. And to see all 7 children in the wedding, my oldest actually officiated the wedding.
Wow.
And when you're successful at blending a family together, is when they come together and they don't say, this is my stepsister, this is my this is my biological. They say that they're siblings, they're brother and their sister. And recently, I did a meet and greet where I was a guest speaker and I was talking, and my stepson was in the room. And as he was talking about why he was there, he didn't say that he was some kin to me. And then I said, and he said, oh, one more thing. That's my mom. That was one of the most proudest moments because here he is considering me something as important as a mother to him. And that's when we look back and say, if there's one thing we got right during our marriage, it was blending our children together to where my ex-husband, when he sees my latest husband's children, he greets them and gives them, he knows who they are. They all know who each other. And it's just a happy place to be.
Well, that's cool. I think that's important. My final question is, what advice would you give someone who, particularly a young lady who is interested in banking? What advice would you give that person, and if they wanted to kind of mirror what you've done in your career?
It is so different now. Back then, it was what you and I probably both experienced at that time in our career. We had to fight and climb to be recognized for even just the banker role that I just explained to you. Today, you see an increase in diversity in the banking industry. But what I challenge people to do, if you want to get into banking and you want to be serious about it, do not be afraid to tackle those entry-level roles first so that you can kind of get a feel for the bank as a whole from a different lens. Because there's nothing like, back in the day when you used to be able to have to work your way up. Today, they can take you and say, well, you have a degree in urban planning. We're going to put you over here on our community and economic development team. Well, that may not be where you want to be just because you have a degree in urban planning. You may actually want to be a mortgage rep. But I encourage people to get to know every single space within banking because every single department needs an us in it. Not only because we add a little flair to it, but because when you talk about the diversity of the market that we're trying to attract today, we have to be able to have people see and hear people that look and think
That's
and
right.
embrace one another. So that's one thing I would challenge. And then the second thing I would challenge them is to get a mentor, get someone who has been through what I've been through so that they can avoid some of the pitfalls that can come along the journey. And then to remember to stay true to who they are as an individual. That's one thing I can tell you. I have never changed up who I am in the boardroom just for the sake of a dollar. I've always been true to being Tasha Pettis, the little Black girl that grew up in North St. Louis City, who happened to be private school educated. It is who I am. And my parents, once again, I attribute it to them. They were not shy to let people know. They were leaders in the corporations they were with, but they were from Pruitt-Igoe. They were from the Vaughn Projects. And that's something that they wore proudly.
Well, that is great advice. And I want to thank you for being my guest today. And so I'll leave you with what I always leave you with. Let's talk. Let's have a conversation. Thank you again, Tasha, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
This is brought to you by Kansas City Business Association, working to improve our community.